Thank you very much. Well, of course, there's a difference between singing at the opera and singing at the NICU. There's not that much room for warm-up in the NICU. Actually, no room for me, 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 and so on. But I would like to start this in some way first. How do we do it, please? Help. Där, precis. Exactly. Good. So, singing in the NICU. What do we have on the parent perspective on singing in the NICU? Do they dare to sing? How do they sing? And which songs do they sing? I took the liberty of posting at our Facebook page last night to see what the parents had to say, if they dare to sing or not. And I got some quite interesting answers, but I will come back to that in the end. First of all, singing by the incubator is complicated. After my daughter was born in week 24, she was quite unstable and sick, and since we couldn't take her out, I was often sitting by the incubator holding her hand. So although I didn't know if it meant something to her, anything to her, I started to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And since there were other families sitting in the room, I kept my voice down. It was quite a barrier for me to cross to actually start to sing openly. And even though I was a professionally trained opera singer. So I can only imagine sort of the effort for a normal parent, so to speak, to sing openly. But as we will see in the comments, it's extremely rewarding when they finally do it. So I sat there singing that tune over and over again. And as I wrote this presentation, I realized what a sort of emotional and tragic picture that is. Because, of course, she couldn't hear me in the incubator. So there I was, a parent who was sitting by the incubator, alone at night, singing to myself. But it had a purpose. Because as I said, I was calmed down by my own singing, and I felt like I was doing something. Singing affects us in a lot of ways. Of course, we have the obvious effect on the listener, but it also affects the person singing. It feels good to sing to someone, both physically and emotionally. And when singing to a child, it almost defines us as parents or supporters or grown-ups. When I sang to my daughter, I felt meaningful as a parent, and I think it strengthened my ability to bond to her later in life. And that actually unregarded if my daughter had heard me or not, I would say. But maybe some parts did go through after all. Because this is a clip of my daughter when she's almost 3 years old. That's the uncorrected age, so she's 2 years and maybe 7 months. And she's singing, and I record her by the piano.
Okej, vi får göra.
Yeah. I want to do it again, she says. Yeah, that's her. She's quite fast and sharp, but she's a little bit restless. After 3 weeks after she was born, we got to take her out of the incubator to sit skin on skin. And at first, I was, of course, terrified. I've been talking about this earlier. But those hours of skin and skin sort of actually made me being able to reconcile with that whole period of being at the neonatal ward. There was endless time of me and her sitting there, falling asleep, waking up again, and short periods of singing. Or as I want to look upon it, even though we didn't have eye contact or anything, it was like us communicating for the first time. Because to me, singing is communication. There are situations when music acts as a one-way communicator, as when you listen to a record. But when done live, music is always a two-way process. It's a question followed by an answer. The singer sends out a message and tries to read the answer from the audience. Even in a big opera house like this for 1,300 persons, you can almost feel the audience is continuously sending out a response. And the singers are constantly listening, watching, trying to perceive emotions and intentions from the audience, but also from the orchestra, from the conductor, and through the colleagues. And there's an enormous amount of perceived communication going on, almost in a collective subconscious way, although that is not evidence-based, of course. And singing to my daughter was exactly the same thing, although much more subtle and slow in tempo. And when I got her on my breast, she was still very fragile and unstable, and slowly I dared to start humming, very softly, almost one note at a time, like It was as I reached out to her with the question, "Are you fine with us talking?" And her answer showed itself in movements or grunts if she was uncomfortable. And if she was fine, she was just lying still and being very, very alert. And I wanted the melody to be in exactly the right tempo, which was incredibly slow. And I could feel her focusing for longer and longer periods. And I wanted it to make it just loud enough for her to for her interest to come, but soft enough not to create anxiety or fear. And what often happened was when I made a sudden change or jump in a melody, she could respond by grudge a bit immediately, telling me to slow down. And from the start, every change of a note felt like a revolution. So if I did like, that would be definitely too much for her. It was as if the tempo information within the music, the information density, so to speak, had to be slow enough for her to process. So fast tempos require fast processing, and bigger intervals needs more time than small, due to sort of the emotional or the informational content. And after a while, I actually started to sing her arias, but of course I made it in like a Nidkep style. And this could be one. This is from Zauberflöte, the magic flute. It's the first tenor aria. And I sang it extremely soft, and sometimes that's so slow that we seemed to have an agreement whether it was time to go on to the next note or not. So it could be And I don't know if there's some kind of key element in anticipating the next note. It is a moment filled with presence and sort of highlighted concentration. And it resembles a situation in acting when everything is quiet and your mind just expands and you're extremely alert and perceptive. And I wanted her to feel that as well. The wonderful thing, of course, with singing Mozart is that every phrase has its own rhetoric and meaning and purpose, and that the phrases are organized in a circular way, so you come back to the tonic in the end, and there's a feeling of sort of relief. And I would like to get a little bit theoretical, because I think it's quite interesting to talk about the associations we get from music rather from the sort of melodies themselves. So why is music so effective in stimulating our minds? To a large extent, the Western harmonics are built on natural characteristics of a string or a pipe. That's like wavelengths of an air or a string. And that combined with natural overtones creates chords. It's fascinating physics that sort of comes into music. An octave is creating by cutting a string in half. Ba, di, ba. And quints are done by cutting them in third. Ba, da, di, ba, like that. And they create chords and then they create harmonies. And they have their own language and rhetorics. Tonality is like a sensation of a predetermined order that you can say. Everyone knows it when they hear it, that you come back, you're coming home sort of in the end. And it's a system that is perceived relations, stabilities, attractions, and thus communicating some sort of content, of course. And an interval can have its own emotional meaning, and so can different chords alone or after one another. And the concept of moving around one note or chord is learned quite early, I think. And I just want to play this example for you. When she's improvising, my daughter, at a little bit more than 3 years of age, and she's keeping it very close to the tonality, although the chord on the ukulele she's actually playing on by herself is quite dissonant. For those of you who want to know, I find out it's a mix of an E minor combined with a G major, and she's struggling to decide which one is going to be sort of her ground or main note. And somewhere in the middle, I think she decides. I think she's there now. And she wants to come back to la, but of course, la is like the normal tonality. And there's still not a consensus whether this predetermined order of tonality is natural or if it's like a psychological agreement. But these harmonies are quite universal, I think, in the Western world. And thus, a lot of generations have connected these harmonies to different emotions and concepts. And that is what we give to our children when we sing to them. We are giving them, providing them with the common definition of different emotions. So I was actually not just singing, I was telling her stories with an emotional content. And the intervals and the tonality actually creates an additional storyline beneath the text and the melody that also increases the informational content, the informational density. And this is the last page of the theoretical part, but it will get a little bit worse. So I made this up myself, but it's quite clear. This is a picture of information density of different languages, and they sort of vary depending on the language. But I would like to think that if you add melody, tonality, and emotion to a language, you also increase the informational density. And that is communication of a very high level, especially for children to take in. And that's, of course, the point, that maybe that's why the music is so effective in stimulating the brain and have cognitive developmental effects, and that's why I sort of wanted to sing to her. But that is also why she was overwhelmed in the beginning. And my goal has always been to listen, to deliver as much information through music as possible, but focus on deliver exactly the right amount of information to the situation, so to speak. To have an agreement, to have a meeting, to have a sort of a connection. And that's why I think it's a bad idea to just play Mozart in the incubator. I don't know if anyone does that, but my deepest feeling is that it is the interaction and the listening and the communication that really does the trick. When my daughter grew, we slowly changed to more extrovert singing, of course, singing rhymes, children's songs. And the big change came when she was like 32 to 34 weeks. And then she got very much more tolerant to sounds. And when we came home, we used a lot of gestures involving hands and feet and body, so to speak. When she was 9 months, she was diagnosed with a cerebral palsy, which was, of course, hard, but it's very mild, and that's a completely different story. And then we developed practices and routines through training her difficult side with musical rhymes. And we sang her to sleep, of course, every night. And I think she developed enormously well, although it's not a sort of a credit to us at all. Everything went well until she discovered the iPad that was very hard. That was sort of even more intriguing than music. And I think, although she's discovered Spotify now, I think we're losing the war against it. And I just see all of our effort going down that screen, sort of. But I hope it's hidden somewhere. So my take-home message today is, of course, I'm really glad that I get to speak to you, and I'm really glad that this is taking place in the NICU. I think it means a lot for all the parents and the children as well. And though I know it sounds pretentious, I'd like to think that we're not just producing melodies, but actually creating meetings, communication, telling stories about what it means to be human, actually, and part of a community. And that it has an advantage of being taught at a very, very low age before speaking. So this is what the parents said. I'm going to read some quotes for you. One mother said, "My mother," i.e. the grandmother, "sang carefully to my kids when they were in the incubator, but she got told by a nurse that they were too sensitive to stimuli. After that, it took a while before we dared to sing to them. But since then, we never stopped." And you can understand both the parents and the nurse, of course. Next one. "I sang and hummed to my son all the time, and when I ran out of melodies, I went over to Iron Maiden. It makes my son being calm, even today, by singing it." Great. "I sat and sang quietly, not to disturb the others or my own baby too much. It was like a therapy to me, and it made it easier to bond with my baby in a sterile and unpersonal hospital environment. There were a lot of hours of singing." And this is a nurse saying, "I didn't sing too much to my child. I think she's a preemie mom herself. But now as a staff, I see advantages where parents often sing some tunes to their kids, and then when they're away, I can sing it to them instead. I sing a lot, and I discovered that a child was very calmed by just Ida Sommarvisa, which is a Swedish song. And when I told the mother, she was very happy because that's the one she always sang to her baby." And I would like to finish by giving you the last example of my daughter singing just 3 weeks ago. This has nothing to do with my presentation at all, actually. It's just me being a proud father. I kept the cough in the end, so you would be sure she's a BPD preemie. But
Okay.
Ute blåser sommarvind, högre av högan lund. Mor hon går på gröna mängd, bäddar på havens blomstersäng, stränder långa rader utav ros och blader.
thank you.